recorder that you put under the tree.
Yeah.
Can you take those out and put them in a, like a voice thing and determine how many different voices there are that you're hearing?
So, yeah, so that's what, that's actually a research project that Trent Racine, he was one of the biologists in the video. He's actually working on his master's right now and trying to figure that out. And so they do, you put it into a computer and it goes through, so we don't sit, it would just, you have hours and hours, so you don't have someone sit and listen to it, but it just, the computer algorithm goes through and you train it to look for wolf howls. And so you run, 14 gigabytes or whatever, terabytes, whatever it is, huge data sets. And the computer mines it for the signatures of the howls. And then you just look at the specific howls and the time frames of those. And they're trying a couple different things. They're trying to see if they can figure out how many voices, how many pups, how many adults are in there based on their howls at different times of years. Because the pups have a lot higher pitch, kind of whinier howl, and the adults are a little bit more deep and long drawn out. And so they can try and tell the number of individuals, but then there's also cool stuff. If you have multiple recorders out and you pick it up on multiple recorders, they can triangulate and find rendezvous sites and find locations of activity centers where those wolves were together and howling, just by where those recorders were. And they can, and so just because of the timing, they're all programmed with a specific clock. And so the time it takes to receive those howls, this one picked it up at this time, this one picked it up at this time, and they can tell the distance and triangulate where that howl actually occurred on the landscape. So it's a pretty cool tool. It's still in its infancy on what we could actually do with it. But that's part of Trent's master's and research to try and we want to know how many recording devices do we have to put it out in order to get howls and get information that we need within a packed territory that's 350 square miles. And so is that 10 recorders or is that 20 recorders, and how far spaced should they be? So there's a lot of stuff to figure out to make them work. The Forest Service has been using these a lot for bird counts, and so they put them out, and a lot of the birders are using it to try and get.
But they all have really different songs.
They do have really different songs, but wolves too have different voices as well. And so it's just, in a computer, you can see those nuances and where it comes out. And so it's trying to figure out. I don't know all the details of it. Trent's working on that stuff. We'll have his master's and stuff finished up. And there's some folks in the Midwest working on this as well. And so hopefully, as multiple people work on it, we'll get more and more information and make it easier to utilize it as a tool. So.
What part of the state are you testing that in?
There was I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Predator Prey project the department was doing up out of Okanagan and then Chewelah, Colville area. There were 2 study areas on that. And so they had wolves collared, they had cougars collared, they had mesocarnivores, the coyotes and bobcats collared, they had elk collared, they had whitetails collared, and they had mule deer collared, all in these study areas. And so there was multiple graduate students from University of Washington working on that project. They had the collaring efforts, but then they had camera grids set up too, and looking at it from multiple facets of how wolves and cougars are affecting ungulate populations and vice versa, how wolves are affecting cougars and cougars are affecting wolves. And so there's a lot of research going on, and this was just part of that project. Since we had known wolf populations or collared wolves in those areas, as well as these other critters, we could use that as a good study area to figure out the audio component as well. So there's a video called Predator Prey out of University of Washington. It's a cool video that talks about that project as well. So you might check it out.
So, how about the Blue Mountains on the declaration of the elk with the introducing of the wolves?
Yeah.
Does the game department do a survey on that?
They do. Every year they've been surveying the elk population down there, and the numbers of elk in the blues, there's a couple areas that they're definitely below their objective of what they were looking at. And part of what they were seeing was the calf recruitment was down. They weren't seeing the cow to calf ratios in the spring with their spring surveys. And so 2 years ago we went in and started looking at those. Well, we did a kind of a review of those surveys and what was going on down there. And in 2016-17 winter, we had a really bad winter, and not just the Blue Mountains, but all our elk populations suffered, and a lot of our eel populations suffered from that winter. So we had a really booming elk population until 2016, basically, and then that winter just knocked them way back. Well, then the summers after that, 17, 18, 19, and 20, we had drought conditions and very little August moisture, and that makes a huge difference on calf survival and cows getting nourishment. And so the population's kind of on this knife edge, and it's not building back as quick as you'd want to see. And so then, but we weren't seeing those calf recruitments, so we were wondering why that calf recruitment wasn't there. And so we put collars on a bunch of elk calves in that area 2 years ago, and it happened to be one of the worst droughts we'd seen in years. And so, you know, you have very little spring forage. We didn't have any moisture at all in the spring and summer. And so those calves, one, they don't have a lot of nourishment from mom, and they don't have a lot of hiding cover because everything's dry and dead. And then they aren't growing as fast, and so they aren't getting bigger to escape predators. And so we had really high mortality on elk calves from cougars that summer. And so, you know, we had like a 17% survival over the course of the year in those elk calves, which is really low, and it's not enough to build that population. And so, fast forward 1 year, we collar them the next year, we had incredibly good conditions. We didn't remove any more cats than we did the previous year, any more cougars. They upped the bag limit, but the number of cats taken was not any different between the 2 years. But we had really good spring conditions, we had really lush vegetation, we had good rains all the way through June, and some in July, and we had good forage, and our calf survival was 3 times higher. It was in the 50s the next year. And so it's amazing how that drought and that climate, and as we look at climate change and we look at those things, that's gonna really be impacting our populations, and we're trying to get a handle on that stuff. When we looked at the mortalities, we had primarily the biggest mortality factor was cougars that first year. But then we also had,
Bears.
there was some bears, but it was pretty negligible for that. And I think they had 1 wolf, over the whole summer. So wolves was not really an issue. They had malnourishment. They had, some signs of other diseases in there. So that really drought summer. The next year, they had far less of the other stuff. They had far less predations on those calves, and we had 57% survival rate or some ballpark like that. It was 3 times higher. And so, just having that moisture, just having good forage, they have hiding cover, they grow a lot faster, they can evade predators a lot easier with good nourishment, and so that stuff makes a huge difference. And so it's still a lag, because those cows come into the fall, you know, but now it's, you know, they still gotta have calves, and now we gotta have another good year to still get that build. But, you know, it was just amazing to see the 2 different years. They were completely different years. Yeah.
Well, I know that hunting has just really gone downhill
Right.
about the last 5 years.
Yeah, and like I said,
Maybe fires too. There's been a lot of fires in the Blue Mountains on both sides, Oregon and
Yeah.
Washington.
absolutely. Yeah, we had some big fires roll through, but it's that drought. And if they've got forage and they got good food, they're gonna do great. But if we get really dry summers like we had from 2016 on, those dry summers up until this last year have been terrible for growing elk. And so we just gotta get those summer rains and doing those rain dances to get that back so they can actually start growing. But it's amazing how they can evade predators and do well when they get good conditions. So it's been kind of interesting to look at that. And I think we'll probably be collaring calves again this year to see a 3rd year. But we've had very complete different years in the calf study that they're doing. So it's really hard to make heads or tails of that. It's going to take probably several years to figure it out. So
Thank you.
yeah, yes sir.
I wanted to just make a comment on Harold's comment earlier. I've been working with some Seattle Public Utilities. They have some acoustic monitors out, and a lot of the bird calls actually do get mistaken for other bird calls. So a lot of the acoustic monitoring equipment is very sensitive. So it's really difficult to differentiate between, for instance, like an American robin and a marble murrelet. One is very significant, one not so much.
For
And
sure.
they trip the same frequency on the monitors.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you get a lot of false positives for
Yep.
murrelet in areas that have American
Well, I think that's where that training data is so important to go through and that computer learning, I mean, it's still a new technology too. It takes time to get that stuff to figure it out, so.
Yeah.
Trent's working through all those details and
What was Trent's last name?
Racine,
Racine, okay.
so ROUSSIN,
Okay.
and so he's kind of working through those details now, but it's, we put a lot of audio mounts up at known rendezvous sites and den sites, and we got coyote howls and all the things that sound like wolves, so that the more information we can feed it, so the computer can differentiate that stuff, the better, but it's, you know, you gotta get all that training data, and then you gotta, you know, you still have to figure out how much it's false classifying stuff.
Yeah, and there's
When
big,
you listen, can you hear the difference between and the raw? Is it just confusing the computer or the
No.
computer as well?
but there's like 5,000 entries. So
So
you're not gonna,
assuming it's not wrong.
you're not gonna sit there and listen to 5,000 different bird calls per one species. So yeah, you need this, you need to train it to sort through it, because that's way too much time for someone to sit through.
So like when you play the first one, you can tell, that was a robin clearly. The second one, robin, I'm done. It's not that one.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Cornell Labs does great.
Yeah.
They provide kind of that learning for birds, but I don't know who's doing it for wolves.
Yeah, well, I think we've worked with them down in Oregon.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think Trent's worked with them a little bit, and the Forest Service has some folks that are trying to figure this stuff out, and so working with them to try and share data,
Yeah.
and, you know, it's a learning experience, and I don't think anybody has it dialed in perfectly yet, so
We're
we're
figuring it out.
trying to figure it out for sure. But it's a cool technology, and I think it could be really helpful in the future.
So I have another question. If you were to have a guess, based on little pinpoints you've seen of wolves out in the Puget Sound area, what is more likely them coming through the I-90 corridor from east to west, or north to south?
I think probably, I mean, from what I've seen so far, and I don't have a lot, but I've seen them dip over, in a couple spots, in the Cascade River area by Stehekin. I've seen them dip over on Highway 20 and come across the top through BC and drop in on the backside of the Satan. We've seen them obviously come across I-90 corridor and then Middle Forks, Snoqualmie, coming up over the pass. South of there, I don't have any data to tell other than the one that went straight south, but didn't cross over. So, but yeah, you know, kind of the White River to, I think it's the Swaddle, is that what it is? The Swaddle that's on the other side of the White River. You know, so we've seen a couple kind of touch their foot over there, and I'm always looking and harping on these guys to get their cameras out, check their cameras, and they're running cameras over here. I mean, I couldn't do it without the whole fleet of folks helping to find this stuff. And like I said, the public observation, I mean, these guys putting their cameras, I can't get around. There's 3 of us, we can't get around the whole state to do all this, so we rely on a whole fleet of other people, bios and conflict enforcement and public.
If I can follow up, to your camera placement, is that, I noticed on your slideshow, is that normally like on established game trails, or more Forest Service roads, main roads? Where do you find them?
All of the above. You know, for me, when I put cameras up, if I'm trying to get counts in that, I just look where the wolves are going. If I find tracks or signs, scat, scrapes, anything that I see that I think, oh, a wolf has been here, I'm gonna pop a camera up. It could be on a main road, it could be on a side road. I try and tuck it in and hide it as best I can, but it might be on a game trail. It just depends on where we're at. And so, but I usually try and let the wolves dictate. In these areas where we don't have wolves, then you're just kind of, I might look for saddles, I might look for heavy game trails, signs of deer and elk, things that I know are gonna be signs where I would expect a wolf to move through. Could be a creek bottom with some elk trails through it or something. You know, but they do use our trails. I mean, that's the thing, when wolves are on a landscape, they aren't cryptic. It's not like a cougar where, you know, they cross roads. These things are gonna line out down a road for 3 miles. And so you're gonna see tracks down the road. And, you know, where most people blast by, I've got my head out the window at 5 miles an hour and they're honking at me because I'm trying to find tail claw marks in the gravel, you know. And so it's, yeah, you try and look for that sign and try and pick out those areas where you're expecting them to move and pop the camera up. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Yes, sir.
So if I incidentally got a wolf on a trail camera, especially if it's a collar recording tool on the website I should go to and just?
Yes, sir. So if you go on our Fish and Wildlife website, and it's under the home, and if you just go to